The real question is, will you edit out anything that I say stupid? Or at least let me know, man. Let me know. All right. So it looks like we're good. And it looks like, oh, something weird with our recordings are happening. Hold on just one sec. All right. Okay. Here we go. All right. So I'll do the intro. Like I said, Greg, I will fail. So it looks like we got a couple people in the chat hanging out. So hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Everybody, we were just talking and it dawned on me that tomorrow is the 20-year anniversary of Brianna's disappearance. So if everybody could say a prayer for Bruce and the rest of the family, that would be nice. So I'll go ahead and get started. Greg Overacker is a private investigator for the family of Brianna Maitland, a 17-year-old girl who went missing from a tiny Vermont town from a tiny Vermont town on March 19th, 2004. Brianna was a fiercely independent high school student who worked 2 jobs to support herself and her interests. She was living away from her parents, Bruce and Kelly Maitland, in order to attend her old high school, where she could be with most of her friends. Brianna had aspirations for college, and March 19th started out as a good day for her. She passed a math test that was a part of her high school GED test. Brianna celebrated that success by going shopping with her mom and headed back to her friend's home and off to work at her job as a dishwasher at the Black Lantern Inn, a restaurant and pub in the covered bridge rich town of Montgomery, Vermont. At 11:20 p.m., Brianna finished her shift, declined a chance to eat with her colleagues, and headed back toward her friend's home in Sheldon. She never made it. Instead, her car was found backed into the side of a building on a 2-lane scenic highway that crisscrossed streams and passed scenic farm views along the way. She was nowhere to be found. Did she run away? Had she planned to meet a friend at that location? Had she had an accident and wandered off the side of the road into the fields and the trees? Was she the victim of domestic abuse or something like a drug deal gone wrong? The police investigation did not get off to a great start, just as true in so many missing persons cases. But as investigators from the Vermont State Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and investigators for the family began to turn over clues, it began to feel increasingly more plausible that the implausible was true. Had she been murdered? Had someone stalked her? Had someone tried to run her car off the road or trick her by flashing their lights and pretending they had seen something wrong with her car? There were signs of a struggle. There were unusual tire tracks. Water bottles were found on the ground along with Brianna's necklace. Her keys were missing. There were reports that both doors were open and a turn signal had been left on. A lime wedge was frozen to the car trunk that had been smashed so hard into the building. Brianna's disappearance happened only a month after 21-year-old nursing student Maura Murray vanished on a 2-lane rural road only 80 miles away in Woodsville, New Hampshire, where they connected. Brianna and Mora's cases in many ways are unusual, but the impact on their loved ones and the approaches investigators have to take and the challenges they face are not dissimilar to many people who go missing each year. One day, while driving on the New York State Thruway, Greg stopped at a rest stop. There he saw a missing persons flyer that Brianna's father, Bruce, had posted. Greg decided to give Bruce a call. That was the beginning of a deep friendship that's led Greg to drive the family's investigation into Brianna and Bruce to start a nonprofit called Private Investigations for the Missing, which provides qualified private investigators at no cost to the families of the missing. Today, we're going to talk about Brianna and Mora's cases, the difficulties of investigating missing persons cases in general, what caused Greg to pursue his career as a bounty hunter and private investigator, and what we can do to help the loved ones of those who are struggling. Hey, Greg, just wanted to thank you for joining today. Like I said, it just dawned on me that we're one day away from the 20-year anniversary of Brianna's death. And, I had the honor of talking to, Bruce Maitland earlier in this year. And one of the things that he had said to me was, even though he was skeptical at first when you made that first call, how important it's been for the family to just know that someone's still looking and know that somebody cares and know that you can trust someone. So I'm really honored and glad to have you on here. And I also recently just read your book, The Hunt for Brianna Maitland, and I was really impressed. It's, I think the first coherent exploration of the case that I've ever read. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of information, isn't it?
It is. But, one of the things that I really liked about it was that you didn't fall into the true crime trap of trying to just tell a simple narrative.
Right.
And you really looked at a lot of different angles for the story. And so I appreciate it. I get, from my perspective as somebody who's a little bit more analytical than most, why Bruce would appreciate that kind of approach and why investigators would appreciate that kind of approach. So,
the odd thing is that the story, the story's rather basic. I used to call Lou in the evenings almost every night and talk to him about that when I was writing the book. Of course, we do that all the time anyway about other topics to do it. But
that's book, Lou Berry, the investigator working with you on Maura Murray's case.
Yeah, Lou Berry's came with us in 2016, I think September 2016. He's a 35-year law enforcement veteran, retired police chief, and God sent to us. But he and I would discuss Brianna's case, and it really is kind of basic at its core. The book is all the things that are going around it that are rumors and people that confessed and people that were thought to be involved. And that's, I think, where it gets really interesting and intriguing. And, the people up there in the community, I've gotten 100, if not more, messages on Facebook from people up there that said, thank you for writing this. This is beneficial to our community and resolved rumors that we believed and that weren't true and stuff like that. So
was knocking down some of those rumors, because one of the things that I recall from my days reporting, we would report on certain things, they would make it in the news, but for everything we reported, there were 10 or 15 rumors that we had heard or other related things. Many of them made it to the families and to the neighborhood. Was it important for you to knock down some of those rumors?
It was important to the family. It was important to, can you imagine having this horrible tragedy happen to you, and every time you go out into public, 99% of the public has a misconception about it or believes something that's untrue about it. And that's become kind of a part of the internet age, I think. But this set it straight. And people could see that. They could see that they weren't being cajoled into something that's not true, because when they read the book, there's dates and times and places. And that's another thing, when I would speak to people before they read the book, if I had that opportunity, if they bought it directly from me on Facebook or something, or I just happened to speak to them, I would tell them, look, it's kind of heavy reading because of that. And it gets a bit repetitive because there's 2 lengthy newspaper articles that are important to the case. I thought they were important. And they were written by my friend Hank Albarelli. And then there's a timeline in it. So it gets a little repetitive, but don't look at that in a bad way. Look at it as learning the material and seeing the nuance that's in it and stuff like that. And Yeah, so
Well,
it's a journey when you start reading all that detail.
well, I was going to ask you before we get into sort of how you and Bruce met. I wanted to ask you about, you had mentioned that that idea that you know these kinds of rumors are a part of our modern um, true crime space, and that for me it's been a bit of a concern, right? Coming from the perspective of sort of a journalist, and not to say that there are other types of creators who can add value. I'm somewhat bothered, I think, at times by, sort of the rumor mongering, the not checking out the facts, people operating in bad faith or taking advantage of, you know, eh, you know, taking advantage of other people's tragedies. I was just curious whether any of what's happening in the space right now is part of what motivated you to tell a more comprehensive and honest story.
I just wanted to put it out there as absolute fact. And I tell people when they read it, look, if you want to know about this and you want to know the facts, this is it. This is where you're going to get it. This is where you're going to get the truth. And I read a crime book, a true crime book, just a while back. It's got to be and I've read hundreds, literally hundreds, and it has to be the worst book I've ever read. And it was written about a missing girl, and it's just horrendous that somebody would put something out like that. But there's got to be some fact checking involved. There has to be. You're a journalist, right? You're a reporter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know the rules. You could probably pull them off the top of your head for me, right? And there's rules. There's a checklist.
And there are also ethical considerations, right? Like not every fact you find out needs to go into a story. For example, a fact that is not particularly relevant to the readers, but may harm the investigation, or a fact that might be hurtful to a family member, or even the family of a perpetrator, a fact that might be hurtful but isn't particularly relevant.
Right.
And I think part of I you use this phrase, the fog. I think a part of what also happens is it creates a lot of fog around the cases. So even people, let's say your local witnesses or other people like that who might be able to help you, probably have a hard time figuring out what they really know and what they have heard from other people.
I'm shocked at the number of people that I talk to when we do interviews, and not just up there, everywhere, that really lack in critical thinking skills. They just don't. They just believe what people tell them, or what they see, or what they see on the internet, what they see on television. They just believe it.
I always tell people, no matter how much you trust me or someone else, check out a couple of other different sources. Well, sure. I was going to just sort of jumping back. I had mentioned that Bruce had said to me that he's really skeptical when he got the call from you. I was just curious about like what that call was like, what captured you when you first saw that missing persons poster, why you decided to call, and maybe, why you thought you could help with the case.
I can't explain it to this day, but I'm looking at that bulletin board, and her picture was there. There were others. I don't know why. When I traveled as a bounty hunter, and I went up and down the East Coast, I was in and out of, I can't even tell you how many police stations and stuff like that. There would be walls of the missing. When you would go into some of them, they'd have all the posters up and stuff like that. I'd see that stuff all the time. I don't know what attracted me to that, but, I reached out to Class Kids, if you're familiar.
Mm-hmm. That's Polly Klaas's father, who went missing in was it the 90s or was it the 80s?
I believe it was 93.
And they help with missing person searches and things like that.
Yeah, Polly went missing from Petaluma, California. A man abducted her right out of her own basement, and she was there with her friends. They were in a sleepover, and killed her. And his name escapes me at the moment. But Mark, her dad, started an organization. Eventually, that organization, unfortunately, was kind of wrestled out of his grasp. But he started another. So there's two organizations, Class Kids and the Poly Class Foundation, I think it is. But they came and truly helped the Maitlands. I mean, they showed up. They organized a professional search. They dealt with the media. They dealt with the police. They did a fantastic job. So anyway, their name was on the poster. I reached out to them, and they reached out to the Maitlands, and then Kelly called me. And I went up to their home. They were living in Gouverneur, New York at the time. They had moved just outside the
media
WCAX's reach, their news reach. They had to have some kind of normalcy in their life. So they were close enough to be able to go back and help with the investigation or do interviews or whatever they needed to do. But when they stepped out their door every day, there wasn't, people giving them forlorn looks and just every.
Well, because I think one of the hard things that people don't understand when a tragedy happens to you in any place, in any local place, everyone looks at you through the lens of that tragedy and nothing else. At the gas station, at the grocery store, at your job, anywhere. And it can be difficult. Well, what do you think it was that got you to think that you might be able to contribute to the case?
I don't know. I had traveled a lot, and it was exhausting me. And I got sick of that lifestyle kind of. I would leave to go to work, and I didn't know when I would be back. Who wants to be in a relationship with someone that's doing that too? When are you going to be home? I don't know. Could be 2 days, could be 2 weeks.
And I can relate.
You're all over the place, and you're awake at all hours, and you're staying in crummy hotels and stuff like that. So it's like, but I thought it would be interesting, and I don't know. I just was gravitated. I have been ever since too. I've always kind of glued to this, but I went up and sat with them, and Bruce was really, I think he was angry, and he was disenchanted with the way things had happened and the way the police had dealt with it. And that's in the book and stuff like that. And but Kelly was pretty talkative. They were living on a farm with some pretty big, mean dogs protecting the place. And we had dinner, and Bruce warmed up to me after that. Took him a little while, and then once the trust was there, he knew I wasn't going anywhere. And then Kelly's kind of, I think, processed it her own way, which is fine, and we have to respect that and stuff. But they ended up going their separate ways, and I kind of stayed friends with Bruce and in contact with him.
Yeah, and I think people process grief, and I think Bruce talked about this too in the episode. People process grief in such different ways. They have to pick different paths. I was going to just ask, why now? And what do you think sort of stands out the most to you that you sort of uncovered and shared in the book that, hasn't really been on the table before?
I don't know. I mean, there was things like, the chapter on Ellen Ducharme, the woman in Burlington who killed the young girl, and she brought Brianna into her story for people that aren't familiar.
She confessed, right?
When she went to what happened was a police officer. Let's start at the beginning. So when she ended up going through the system, she didn't have a trial, but she went through hearings and things like that. She brought up Brianna's name and brought it into her story. So then there's the interest there of what is she talking about? Why is she bringing Brianna into her story? Is this true? It wasn't really looked at really hard, I don't think, by the police. They were aware. They looked into it a little bit. But then her sister, the police came to her home to arrest her son, and she told the police this really disgusting, really detailed, morbid story about Brianna's death. and stuff. And so we ended up, Hank Albarelli and I ended up obtaining this statement. It was a police statement. And he wrote an article about it. But that went out to answer your question, that information kind of went out into the public, and the public kind of didn't know what to think of it. I mean,
had no
they
context.
The basics of it, right. Yeah, they only knew the basics. They didn't know the entire story. So in the book, that's a pretty lengthy chapter and explains it in its entirety. And I think it's really important to get that out there so that the people up there understood what it was and what it was about and what may have possessed her to bring this into her story and say that she knew Brianna and what happened to her. And then, the people she was involved in, one of them was just, there's a whole chapter on this guy that's just
is that like an example for you of sort of knocking a story down that had been running wild there? Or
yeah. And we uncovered that the man that has his own chapter in there, he was just an awful human being. And as far as I'm concerned, the Vermont court system just failed repeatedly with him.
Is that the Brian Rooney?
Timothy Cruz.
Or Timothy Cruz.
So he still lives in Burlington. I mean, he's been a free man, but he killed a kid in 1981, and then
when he was young.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. I probably should have gone into that even deeper and deeper, but for the purpose of the book, I didn't. But
one of the things that sort of frightened me about your book, going through the different cast of characters from, Cruz to Rooney to the woman who killed the other woman in, I think it was St. Albans or somewhere in the North Country, was how many shady characters were in Brianna's proximity. And by that, I don't mean necessarily in her friend group, but just in the area. I was just talking to somebody today about a case, and they were saying, do you think that there could be a coincidence that two sexual predators were in contact with this person who ended up dead? And I'm like, yes, you don't understand how many sexual predators there are out there. Yeah. And it was the same thing. I'm like, I was shocked at how many people looked good for murder or had committed murders or were out.
Yep.
Because
absolutely.
Of murders. Yeah.
When you really start looking at it too, when you're, for the average person, you don't see that stuff, but when you're actually out there and learning about everybody's shady past, it's amazing what's out there. It really is. Yeah. And everybody, when I put his arrest record in there, everybody was just floored. It's like, why is this person not in prison for the rest of his life? It's just a failure of the system. They would charge him with habitual offender and try to put him away 25 to life. And there's actually a video you can watch of a prosecutor. It's online talking about, we're going to charge him, we're going to put him away. And then he would always offer something up and they would always drop it. So we always got off the hook, and he did that for years and years and years and years. And he's a free man today.
I was going to just ask, from your perspective, do you think we're looking over your time working on the case any closer to getting answers? And how do you feel about it now?
Well, that's not a question that you can answer. I mean, it's just, it's not there's no equation to answer that. You know what I mean? You can't quantify and say, it'll be solved in X amount of years or X amount of time or something like that. I don't know. I don't know when it will be solved, if it'll be solved. It won't be for a lack of trying. You know what I mean? Interesting things have come to light, for sure. The police work hard on it. When they have information, they go after it. So we do our best to bring them whatever we can. We think that's important.
Do you feel, from your perspective, that the efforts that you've made have sort of advanced the...
Yeah. For nothing else, we've eliminated a lot. That term you talked about that put in the book, that informational fog. There's so much information that was just useless or untrue, rumor, innuendo, inference, conjecture. You just brushed a lot of that away, And it's the smallest things. I mean, you'll hear people talk about, where a car was found, and they'll say things that aren't correct, or they'll, where she was working or what she was doing or how she was living. And a lot of it's just wrong. So if for nothing else, we've eliminated a lot of things, and a lot of people that even today will mention people as suspects, and I'll say, well, read the book. Well, I don't need to read the book. Well, maybe you do, because the person you're talking about has nothing to do with this. And it proves that, like, oh, okay. So that helps.
Are there any sort of rumors? Well, I'm just curious about it, because it's small town, rural area. I've lived in small towns before, and the rumors are wild.
Yeah.
But, in the Maura Murray case, probably less so, because, there are plenty of rumors, but it's not like it didn't happen in the town where she lived. But in Brianna's case, some of the wild rumors about what could have happened, where she could have ended up, some of them were just absolutely wild.
Oh, I think there's just as many, if not more, in Mora's. I think Mora's even get crazier. Just the insane things.
Is there like something in the water in the North Country?
I don't know how these wild leaps that end up with people. The stories. I don't even know where they come from, but they're. Even some of the people that have been accused of being involved, it's just a leap that they're involved somehow. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think there could be a connection between the two cases?
I do. So that gets me in trouble, of course, because I'm probably the only one that will come out and publicly say that. But there's something that has to be understood about that, because everybody loses their mind about it when I say that. This is my opinion, and my opinion only. It's not Bruce's opinion. It's not Lou Berry's opinion. It's not the police opinion. This is my opinion. And I'm basing it on a lot of things. I can't prove it. Obviously, if I could, we wouldn't be here. But there are a whole lot of things that if it was explained to you, you would absolutely entertain the idea. And it makes sense. And it's based on reality. It's based on, logical thinking. Stuff.
Well, there was, like one of the things that, just like analytically looking at a case, someone goes missing. Most likely thing is they've run away. There's been a miscommunication. There's, these basic, simple things. Then you go outside that bubble a little bit and you get things like suicides and, abductions. And the idea of being murdered by someone is outside that bubble, but usually it's going to be somebody who knows you, right? So when you get to the part of the bubble, which is the vibe that I got in your book, that it could potentially be a stranger in both cases, is it a process of elimination? You look at the most likely things, eliminate those, and if you still have a possibility way out on the outside of the bubble, then you
So it was it's kind of unfortunate that when in the initial stages, and there was issues with the police and stuff, which there's not now. There's a lot of good people been involved in Brianna's case. A lot of good police officers, highly trained, very talented Vermont State Police. But at the time, they made some mistakes, and one of the things that happened was they came out and they said that Brianna was involved in the drug community, and they basically character assassinations. What it did was it took any element of mystery out of it and
everyone's mind.
This is drug related, and she's a 17-year-old kid and she's missing. And you're basically saying it's because of drugs. And there was no proof of that whatsoever. And even to this day, I don't believe that even a little bit. But that completely changed and altered the way people thought about Brianna's case. Okay.
Well, it's the reality. I remember sitting out police officers or, and we hear that the person who was killed is a drug addict. That changes the resources, the way that people look at it. They go default to that. They have to pull themselves out of it. Or you can even see it in the newspapers or the television stations. that, if there's a early drug connection, it gets less space, less airtime.
Yeah.
It has real impact.
The other thing that had a big impact on this, than the way people looked at Brianna's, is because they went back and they started looking at her, the 17-year-old girl that wasn't living at home, and they started looking at her life and they started connecting the dots. And this is what's wrong. And this is it's all confirmation bias kind of thing. So there was a fight prior. She was in a fight with a friend of hers. Her friend had left town. Brianna spent time with her boyfriend. She came home. She confronted Brianna. There was a fight. She beat her up. So everybody thought, well, that's got something to do with it, and that has to be what happened. And to this day, you'll hear people saying that, that girl killed her, or that girl got somebody to kill her and stuff. So you have to buy into the idea that a 17-year-old girl is ordering murders and things like that. And I'm not saying that that never happened. Somebody will always cherry pick where that happened somewhere in the world, in the United States or something, and say, see, 30 years ago or 20 years ago, something that happened in Alabama. And you go, okay, so that must be what happened. I don't believe that for a minute. When you look at the fight, if you want to talk about that particular incident, that girl to this day will.
And that's the fight where a couple weeks before Brianna disappeared, she was with some friends, her boyfriend, and this girl basically chased her to the car.
She was sitting in a car. She was sitting in a car, and the girl walked up, and when she rolled down the window, she punched her a few times and hurt her pretty bad. She was bleeding pretty bad and stuff. But when you talk to that girl, she was in trouble a few times, relatively serious trouble. And they would always give her the opportunity to talk. This would help you out if you'd speak to us. And she's like, if I knew anything, I would have told you. And she was real honest about it. She said, look, if she did that to me, I'd punch her again. It's just the way it is. I didn't kill her. I don't know what happened to her. But and she talks to us freely. She never says there's anything that she won't talk about or anything like that. But anyway, my point of that is, and there's other incidences along the way that a lot of them are in the book. It's all informational fog. That doesn't have, everybody wants to go back and say this had to do with this. The two,
like the boyfriend running into the car,
related. Yeah. The two aren't necessarily, the things aren't related. So, the thing that distracted from the fact that it may have been a rare event. And a rare event is a stranger abduction or someone that she came into contact with that targeted her. So in my mind, everybody's been looking at it wrong. It's like falling for a logical fallacy. When you, and again, this is just my opinion. So when you look at Mora's situation in the book, I explained this. Initially, when these two disappearances happened, Mora was on February 9th, 2004. Brianna was March 19th, 2004. And they're about 80 miles apart, something like that, 85 miles apart. And as far as the distance goes, when you're in that sparsely populated North Country like that, they all consider that their backyard. If you live in St. Albans, people in Burlington, and Burlington know people in St. Albans. That's not
right.
Weird. It would be weird. It would be weird for me. An hour from me is Albany, or an hour from me is Syracuse. And I don't consider that my backyard. It's an hour away, but it's not like that there. There's less people in Vermont, the state of Vermont, than there is in the Albany, New York area. It's very sparsely populated. So when you look at the police came out initially, they had a meeting. It was with the Vermont State Police and the New Hampshire State Police, and the FBI sat in. And they came out of the meeting and they gave a public release, and they said, we don't believe these two things are related. There's no serial killer on the loose. And they made that statement one other time too, a little while after, but then they haven't since. So we know the information that they had at the time. We know what they based that statement on, and they don't have much more now. So this is what they based that on, okay? And this is described in the book at length. Brianna lived at a home with her friend and her friend's father. It was it was pretty structured. There was other occupants in the home. The father went off to work every day. The girl went off to school, whatever. Brianna, the day of her disappearance, she got up. She went shopping with her mom. got her results of her GED exam, had lunch with her mom, came home, changed, got ready, drove to work, which is 20 minutes away, went to work in a little historic inn, which is the size of a large home. I mean, you can see pictures on the internet. There's a little parking area next to it. She worked in there with a small group of people that all knew her, were all familiar with her. She could see her vehicle outside. There's a good picture. She could see her vehicle outside, parked outside in that little parking lot on the side of the building. And no one said anything was amiss, and she didn't act odd. And when she left, she walked out and got in her vehicle, drove away. On the other hand, Mora lived alone in a dorm room, fabricated a story to her instructors and said there was a death in the family, which there was not. Drove to get alcohol, had a car that was really untrustworthy. It was minus a cylinder. It was smoking real bad. She drove it, 150 miles north to an area that's extremely rural. To me, that says a lot that she would do that with a car like that. She leaves at an unpredictable time to an unknown destination other than herself or anyone that we know of. She has an unpredictable accident. And while standing by her car for a few minutes, she's gone. No one ever sees her again. So you've got Brianna, when she leaves work, she drives up the road 2 minutes and her car is found backed into a building and she's gone. No one ever sees her again. So what they basically looked at these two things and they go, these are not the same, correct? One is kind of structured. She's close to home. She's in a place where people know her. And blah, blah. Mora, on the other hand, is kind of having problems. She's had a few incidences that were odd and blah, blah, blah. But she has this really odd series of events to get to where she's going, to where she goes missing and everything, right? So these things are not the same. So they say these are not related.
But the one thing about that, I would say,
before you go any farther,
okay.
My answer to that is this. With a stranger abduction, he doesn't care. He doesn't give a shit about what your background is, where you're supposed to be. He doesn't care anything about your life or where you're living or who you're around or what was going on prior. It doesn't matter. All he cares about is what's happening right at the moment conducive to what he wants to do. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's two other factors that you have to look at. Well, there's a lot of them, actually. But one thing I think is interesting that people don't think about is that when Brianna leaves the Dutch burn home or the Black Lantern Inn, her car is found at what's referred to as the Dutch burn home, backed into the building. Okay. It's a little house that sits on the side of the road. It's boarded up. It's all weather beaten. There's field all around it. It just sits alone. It's abandoned. It's literally 2 minutes up the road, and it's a fast road. It's 50-mile-an-hour road or whatever. No one pulled up to her as she left. Now, no one knew when she would leave because she's a dishwasher. She usually leaves when she's finished. No one pulled up alongside her in that 2-minute ride in the dark of night on a cold March night in Vermont and said, hey, there's a girl alone in a car. I'm going to abduct this girl. I'm going to run her off the road and abduct her. That didn't happen. Someone had to have been waiting for her to leave, which is pretty easily done. It's like a little neighborhood there before you leave town, and there's a church, a little park, and a lot of kitty corner and stuff. That's the only way this took place. Nobody just stumbled upon her in a 2-minute drive and decided this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Mora, if you have to buy into, if you think someone came upon that accident that she had and said, oh, it's my lucky day. There's a girl on the side of the road that I can abduct and take her out of here. Well, okay. There's a house right there. There's a house right there. There's a house right there. The bus driver pulls up and talks to her. There's these things going on. It happens quickly, really quickly. Is it likely that whoever did this to her, that a neighbor said, I'm going to abduct a girl that's right outside my house? The police will never think to come knock on my door and question me, Or is it more likely that someone got on board to this prior to that accident and targeted her? That's important because that's what I believe happened.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense. I know you're saying that people believe that they're actually that different, but it's all in the, when you think of an abduction, it's all about when in the timeline said abductor identifies his potential victim, and they could be quite similar, in a lot of ways. But one of the things I was just thinking about in your story, it's, there aren't a lot of stranger abductions. And one of the things that, criminal profilers will say is you rely on statistics first. But when there's not enough data, it's really hard to rely on statistics, and you've got to lean out of things you traditionally do around victimology or around other things, because these are unique events. Like Julia Cowley, one of my friends who's an FBI profiler, says, once you've seen a serial killer, you've seen one serial killer, right? That in these unique cases, you really have to drill down to try and get to the facts. I wanted to switch gears and ask you something, that I was just thinking about. When I used to work on long investigative projects around a topic, you would get insight into one aspect of a person's life, another aspect of someone's life. And by the end, you may know more about the person's life, if you've done it well, than, even their closest friends, because all the compartments are there. And I was just thinking, what have you found out about what Brianna was like in life?
What did I find out she was like?
Yeah.
She was like a lot of other 17-year-old kids. And it's funny that she kind of didn't have a lot of fear, and she was, going to go out and do things. She was going to try things. She didn't have a lot of fear. Now that could get her in trouble, but that's a really good quality. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, you always hear people give compliments, and when there's a tragedy like this, you hear people give compliments. I've talked to so many people about Brianna, and they all have, good things to say, and it's interesting. It really is.
Is it not the normal for when you're investigating cases, even of the victim? Do you normally hear a lot of?
I don't do a lot of these type of cases, but you do see that where there are bad people out there, and bad things happen to bad people, and bad things happen to good people. But yeah. And those are all great pictures, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Fearless is what I heard. I remember Bruce said, like, she was always the one who would stick up for the other kids.
She was a little tiny kid. Yeah. Little tiny kid. She wouldn't let the one teacher. He said she had a teacher who he thought had a mental illness, and she would be abusive to the kids. And Brianna was little, and she would get in between them. And
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's funny. They had a mile-long driveway, which is really funny, because when you went to the house and there's the road, you'd see this driveway going back, and it went forever and back into the woods to their house. But they had an old Jeep that she would drive, and off-road and stuff. And on the, to go get the bus in the morning, she would drive it out to the road. So she's this little kid bouncing along this road. I just, I didn't know her, but I can picture this happening. It would crack me up. It reminds me of something my nephews would do. But how funny is that?
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, to your point, there are all sorts of missing cases, and there are all sorts of victims who are, completely different. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to ask you about that, because you do hear such good things. I wanted to also ask you about, like, a lot of all cases, all criminal cases, all missing persons cases are different, but it seems like missing persons cases, and thinking about the work that you and Bruce are doing with private investigations of missing, they share some common things, and there seem to be some traps that law enforcement can fall into, either because they're under-resourced, or it's hard to tell when a missing persons case is, chances are, something bad really happened to a person. I was just wondering what you sort of see the challenges of missing persons cases, and what are some of the opportunities for change, either through the general public, the private sector, law enforcement, nonprofits.
I don't know, but watching the police work on these cases is just really difficult. They work hard, and they're just overloaded. They're spread thin. In Vermont, they have a major crimes unit. They're spread thin. When they have a series of homicides, they had, I think, 6 or 7 a couple months back, and it must have been just a huge burden on them. And they put these cases together. You'll see them come to fruition over time. And it just amazes me that they can do this, that they can get that done. It's got to be a lot of work. And, we hear that complaint about them a lot. They don't know what they're doing. They don't work on this. They're lazy. This is. And in the book, I tried to tell people, look, you don't know what you don't know. Lou always says that. You don't know what you don't know. You don't realize that they have worked on this a lot. And there's tons of information and tons of things that you just don't even know exist, that the searches they've done that they haven't talked about and things like that. I can't even imagine how many interviews they've done and stuff like that. And getting away from your question here, I don't know what could be done to change this. I think that private investigations for the missing is a help. It's a good start. The problem is that people can't afford private investigators. They just can't. It's too expensive. So that's why the organization is important. And, we can take things to the police over time. The police have to move on. They have other pressing commitments constantly nagging at them. I mean, you think about it for a minute, especially with small to medium-sized towns. I mean, they're doing everything from directing traffic to homicide investigations. That's a huge span of what they're capable of.
How do you guys help them or work with them? Like, how do you interface with them? I was always so curious because I'm used to private investigators in civil settings, not being involved in, or maybe criminal defense, but not being involved on the other side of the coin, trying to solve the case for a victim's family or with law enforcement. How do you collaborate?
Well, Lou's got a ton more experience than I do. He's far more knowledgeable and stuff like that. I just always took I just always gathered information. I gathered as much information as I possibly could and gave them whatever I thought was important. And that's what Lou's more of the liaison now. And he vets stuff and gives it to them. And that's important because they don't have the time to go out there and beat the streets. They have other things going on. As time goes on and decades go by, they're just, they can't always go out and be on the offensive.
Well, and I think there's probably some value to them in having somebody who understands investigations, sort of vetting the funnel and making it manageable. Not being, because that's one of the concerns you always worry about. I think it takes as much time to chase down a bad lead as it does a good one. So 100 bad leads. And so part of the reason why you guys started private investigations for the missing was to be able to help families get qualified investigators to engage. And one of the things that I was curious about for you, I know you were a private investigator yourself before. I assume you worked on all sorts of cases when you did that, but you've also done a lot of other cool things. You worked as a bounty hunter, worked as a repossessor, and you said you had some normal jobs that you just hated.
Yeah, when I was young. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've worked a normal job.
Like normal people jobs?
Honestly, most of the work I did was fugitive recovery. So that's what I did. That was my forte.
So that's the bounty hunting, bail bondsman, U.S. Marshal's partner work. What do you consider a normal job? I read that in the book and I was like, what is he talking about?
9 to 5 kind of thing,
Sitting at a desk, putting on a suit and tie.
I haven't had a 9 to 5 in 30 years more.
Not snatching a car or jacking someone up.
That stuff, I did that because when I wanted to be home more, I started doing that. It was good money when I initially started. It was pretty good money. And I had process serving business, which I still do.
Oh.
So that keeps me busy. That's kind of like a staple income. So I do that, but I work and there's only 3 missing persons cases that I work. 2 of them is kind of off the record, and then Brianna's. So, and Brianna's is most of it.
Yeah. Well, how did what was it like to do that work, that fugitive recovery work? And how did you parlay that into private investigations? Are they similar?
Yeah. So in certain states, you had to be a PI.
Mm.
Every state had different laws pertaining to if you could function or not. Some states even had it where you had to be the bondsman that wrote the contract, that wrote the bond. Luckily, there wasn't too many of them. Some didn't have, going back quite a few years, some of them didn't have any, laws pertaining to the licensing or anything like that. New York State is a licensed state now. You're grandfathered in. If you're a PI, you can perform bail arrests. I did it when I was young and it was exciting and I wanted to do it. And it was crazy and it was interesting. But after a while, I don't want to be on the road anymore. How long can I do this without getting shot? So it was hot. I gotta come home and change this.
How long till my spouse or my partner or my family shoots me because they're worried about me getting shot and they just want to get it over with?
And I think everybody's situation is different too. So if I lived in Los Angeles or something, you could work in your city probably all your life. But I wasn't. Right. I'm in upstate New York, so I would travel. Now I live close to the thruway, but I would travel. So what would happen was I would advertise nationwide, and people would contact me here to pull people out of the Northeast and take them to wherever they were. In other words, someone in South Carolina would call me up. They don't want to drive all the way to New York State to see if their guy is where they think he is. They would call me and say, they would give me the contract and say, go pick him up and bring him here. So that's how that business kind of works. So I was getting calls from all over the place and taking people back to where they belonged. And then when I got down there, if they had worked there, they would give me sometimes and sometimes not. I would just come home. But that's kind of how that business functions. They don't, people from Florida aren't going to drive up to New York to poke around. They'll hire somebody in New York to do it.
What are the key skills in that? I imagine it was very funny. Like when we, as reporters, we would have these news researchers who were really good at digging stuff up. But if we really got in a true jam trying to find somebody, there were actually PIs that we would hire to skip trace and do other things like that. What is the day-to-day of the job like?
You got to be a little bit of everything, and you learn that stuff as you go. You get better at it as you go. And then you would have, remember Rolodexes?
Yes, I think I have one.
I had a Rolodex
business card stapled to it.
Yeah, I had a Rolodex with it was like the list of rogue people all over the country that would do different stuff for me and stuff like that. I actually had guys that worked out of Texas that would go into Mexico, and I got them. I would correspond with other people, and that actually came up a few times, and I'm like, why are you calling me? I'm in New York. I'm not going to do that kind of work. But I knew these guys and I would relay the work down to them and stuff like that. But we had guys that would, do all kinds of tracing and stuff like that. And, you're going back to when your home phone was your biggest friend. I mean, you would make calls, tons of calls first. It was boring. A lot of it was boring. There was no cell phones, there was no GPS. I'd pull into a city I was going to work in and I'd go to the nearest store. Remember, they'd have the map section, grab a map of the city. It was part of your job, So you lay it out on your seat and have this big map of all the
big,
yeah.
McNally.
First thing I'd do is I'd go through and I'd find out where the hospitals were and where the police stations were and stuff in case I got hurt and I needed to get to a hospital. I'd go to the bail bond offices that were in that city and ask them. And a lot of times they'd know who you were talking about because these people are always in trouble. Or they'd put me in touch with somebody, if it was in a housing projects or something, they knew the managers, they knew the people that lived there. There's just a million ways that you learn to pick up on doing that kind of stuff, That was showing my age. We actually put somebody on a plane one time, a nonstop flight, knowing that he just couldn't get off the flight. And the bondsman was waiting for him when he got off the flight. Now, we kind of vetted him first and said, is this going to be an issue? You're not going to ground this plane. And he was a kid. And he was like, no, I'm not going to do that.
So it's all this sort of in addition to sort of the hunting people down, creative ways to.
Oh yeah.
In that work, are you working on, as a bail bondsman, the maximum you can get is how do you get paid in that space? I imagine private investigations are hourly.
When you go and do a bail, when you get a bail bond, say your bond is $100,000, so you have to pay your bail bondsman, who is basically just an insurance agent. They're regulated by the state as an insurance agent, and they have large insurance companies that they work for. You have to pay 10% of that bond. Now, if it's a large bond, they're going to want collateral too.
So you're putting down cash.
Yeah.
10% cash.
Yeah, that's like paying the premium on your car insurance.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to keep that. If you don't show, they're on the hook for the other 90. But they would, if it's a big bond like that, they would take collateral, like your home, a relative's home or something, restaurant, stuff like that. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times what we would do is the families would come to us and say, they would tell us where they were, because they'd say, I'm going to lose my house. You know, I put this up collateral for my relative and now he's screwing me. So they would rat him out.
They give them up. Yeah.
And they couldn't figure out how we found them. They're like, wait, how did you end up on my doorstep? You know,
I don't know. Could it be the person who was going to have to give up their home?
Yeah. You know, the relative would start asking other relatives, and they'd talk to friends, and they'd say, like, I'm going to lose my house. And then somebody would give them up, you know. But so they would pay us the 10%. So they would break even, or they would even lose money in the long run. Because sometimes, you know, if you got out on the road and you said, look, you know, this isn't worth it to me, I'm cutting it off, I'm heading home, they'd say, well, wait, well, you know, we'll pay you more, or we'll pay expenses. It doesn't happen often, but depending on how big it is, they want to get them back. Yeah, so that's kind of basically
why'd you stop doing that? Was it the travel and things like that?
It was, like, you never home, you know. And I ended up getting married. That's kind of what stopped it. I got with her, and she's like, this is insanity. You know, how do you do this? I would leave, and she'd be like, she moved in with me, and she's like, all right, when are you gonna be back? And I'm like, I don't know.
A couple days, weeks.
Could be weeks. Remember the old answer machines?
That requires some very serious trust, right?
Well, that, you know, and then, you know, I could only carry my gun in certain states. So you have to find out, okay, I got to
creative ways to.
Yeah, you got to, and it's not like now you could just look on the computer and look up the laws and stuff. You had to make phone calls, and then the bail laws, which were really obscure. I mean, there were guys going around. It was hard to find, but there were guys that would go around and they would teach classes, and guys would go there and they're like, you know, they didn't know, where do I find this information? How do I look this up? So they would put these things, compile these things to try to help you, and they'd say, look, they're ever changing, but this will give you an idea of what states have what rules. And then you would call the states and try to get the information stuff. Then with the advent of the internet, all that changed. Now everything's at your fingertips. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But there was training classes and stuff like that. I took one of them actually one time. It was informational. But, you know, there's certain people that should never be doing this kind of thing. But it was, so you'd get ready to leave home and you do your homework. And if you're going to a place you never worked before, you know, I ended up having friends in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and stuff, places I could stay, and guys would go to work with me. I'd call them up. Hey, you want to go out and work? Yeah, let me take a few days off or something. Then there was guys, I worked with a guy that was a teacher. And so he had part of the year off. So he would go hunt with me and stuff. But it was involved.
What kind of people shouldn't be doing it?
What's that?
You mentioned some people shouldn't be doing it.
There was just people that just had no moxie. They just it wasn't something that was in their grasp. It was the same kind of person that, you know, you would say this person could never be a cop. It's just not something that they're going to do. I mean, you know, and you got to be kind of reasonable. You got to be kind of logical. You got to have a little bit of common sense. You know, we would come home. You remember the old answer machines where you come home and you'd hit the button, it'd go beep, and then it'd start reading your messages.
I do.
I'd come home and I'd hit it and it'd go beep. And when she moved in, and it would be my employer down in New Jersey, I worked for a guy out of New Jersey, and he would just start talking about the cases and stuff. And she's like, I can't do this. This is too much. It would be, you know, he would say, be careful. This guy's a runner and he's a shooter. You know, like, no, you know, just giving you a heads up before you go out tomorrow. And she's like, what the hell? So that was going to fly. You know, with American stuff. So,
I wanted to ask you, how do you get fulfillment out of your work?
How do I?
How do you get fulfillment out of your work? What is it that gives you a sense of fulfillment or satisfaction?
Out of that or this? What?
All of it. Yeah.
I like this work. It's interesting, and it's, I'm trying to help a family who's suffering through a tragedy and stuff like that. That stuff, I think the bounty hunting stuff was just, I was young and I wanted adventure. And I wanted to get out of this town that I lived in. I was a young guy, and I got to actually go around and see things and travel a little bit, So that was interesting.
But this is different.
This is different. This is, I don't know. This is wanting to do something good for somebody, I think, wanting to, and deep down, everybody loves a mystery. I want to resolve this issue. And you get obsessed, I don't know if that came through in the book, but you get obsessed for sure.
It didn't come off that bad.
No. It's a weird thing knowing that somebody out there lives with this secret. Somebody's holding this secret. And how do they do that? And, if it's the person I believe it is, then it's not that hard for him, because that fits the way he is. He doesn't care.
Do you think if people read the book, they'd get a good idea of who you think it is?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, I came out of it with a new suspect.
It makes sense, I can't go into who that is, but it's,
I was going to ask you, what do you think we as, like the creators, the media, and just the general public can do for families, for law enforcement, for anyone when it comes to helping with these kinds of missing persons cases?
I don't know. I've never been asked that before. I think there's some of these podcasts now are coming out. There's a wonderful group of people that have started doing this thing where it's more about empathy towards the victims and their families, and putting out the correct information there instead of trying to hype things and, put out disinformation. There's a few really, really slimy authors out there that are putting stuff out it's just not good, very misleading. Yeah. There's actually a convention that's going to be in Indianapolis next year. Oh, the Girls for Navigating Advocacy podcast have developed it, and it's all based on that, kind of empathy towards the victims and families.
So you think almost all of us, and that's probably something all of us could do, whether we're a creator, whether we're media, whether we're law enforcement, whether we're the average Joe, just demonstrating empathy, showing up in some way.
Yeah.
And we can all do it in different ways, right? It might be a donation for some people. It might be coming out and searching, or just being there, or putting in that extra hour.
I actually went to a house just the other day to evict somebody, and I just served the eviction papers, but their troopers were there, New York State troopers. Mm-hmm. And he came over to my car and said, "What are you doing here?" And then he said, "Okay, come on up to talk to these people." And the woman was crying really bad, and he handled it so professionally, it blew me away. He was so good with her, and there's a little tightrope you have to walk there, I guess. It was interesting to watch how skilled he was at it.
Yeah. So we have a listener question that I'm going to throw up here.
Sure.
That I think is a good one. What is your scariest moment ever?
Oh,
that's a question right out of my heart, because I was about to ask you, did you ever get shot at? Did you ever have to use that hospital map?
It was in the book, The Nighttime Run. So Sophie has to buy my book, then the story's in the book. So that was one of my early bounty hunting jobs, where I got hired. They thought that a guy was running he was going to go into Canada, and he was in northern New York, and there's a waterway there on the border where this camp was, and they said, we don't know if that's what he's doing, but we think he's up at that camp and he's going to try to go through the woods. He wouldn't have made it. I don't think he would have made it, but so I went up there and I found him, and he was in a little cabin. It was like a shack cabin kind of thing, and I don't buy it, and you can get it directly from me. I'll sign it for you. And he shot at me, and I chased him all night through the woods and until daylight. That was scary. But the scary thing about it was, and today I would never even consider doing something like that. But at the time, it was an adventure. But the scary thing was, it dawned on me when I was there that it's getting dark. I don't know how to get out of those woods. It's going to get cold. There's no streetlights. There's no ambulance. There's nobody to call. I didn't have a cell phone. What am I going to do? It's just me and him, and but that's nasty. I had a few bad incidents. I had a guy in handcuffs and a guy ran up and stabbed him. That was, and ran. That was really bad and got him to the hospital and stuff like that. You just don't know what's going to happen. When I started doing that, I was young and I hadn't really, I only traveled to controlled destinations, when you go with your family on vacation.
What do you mean by controlled destinations?
Like vacation places, touristy places and stuff like that. Or I traveled a little bit to visit family and stuff like that, but I wasn't a well-traveled kid. So when I started doing that, I ended up, one time we ended up in the housing projects in Washington, D.C. And it was bigger than anything I'd ever seen like that. And maybe looking at it now, I wouldn't be overwhelmed by it. But at the time, I was overwhelmed by it. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning. And it was like it was daytime.
At 2 or 3 in the morning,
yeah.
I'm overwhelmed.
I was the only white guy there, But it was also...
Can you imagine man-to-man, door-to-door interviews there? Oh.
It was alive. Well, I was with somebody and they were looking after me. They had me with them, and actually 2 people, a guy and a girl. But it was alive at 3 in the morning, like it was 3 in the afternoon. I mean, there was women with baby strollers and people hanging out,
listening to the radio, chilling. Yep.
It was like it was daytime, but if I had to get out of there, I don't know if I would have found my way out. I'm like, I don't know where to go. It's huge. And I wasn't used to that. I also wasn't used to like if you go to housing projects here where I live in these small towns, if they have, and I've had friends that lived in them, if they have a rip in the screen of the window or something like that, the housing project's going to lose money and they can get in trouble for that. So they have to replace and fix things right away. Everything's fixed all the time. Maintenance is done right away. I'd go, when I was working in New Jersey, we'd go to these housing projects. There would be windows blown out with the burn mark from a fire. You'd go in the hallways inside, and there's never anywhere to run in those places. They're all concrete and steel. And every inch of the floor, wall, and ceiling was graffiti. Every inch, everything, doors, everything was covered. And it just was different than I wasn't used
anything from New York. Yeah. No,
I was working with guys. So I used to work in Patterson, New Jersey a lot, in Newark. And so I would go down there and work with the guy I did work for, the PI. And he had other guys that worked with him. So we would team up. Now it was different down there. Down there, there was a bail bondsman on every corner. There was Bail Bond Row, where there was 3 blocks of just bail bond offices, storefronts. And so we would go and walk down through there, and he would go and have coffee with them and stuff, and they would give us files, and we go to the next one, and they give us a couple files. We go to the next one, go to lunch with them, whatever. You'd end up with a box of files, and then the guys would show up, and we'd pair up, and we'd go pick these guys up. So initially, you would just go around and knock on doors, and a certain percentage of them would answer the door. You grab them and go to the jail. And then you'd have to start looking for others, and then the harder ones would be harder, and you'd travel outside of town and stuff. But there was I remember they took me one time, and those guys worked in those areas all the time. They took me to this huge building, and there was guys up on the roof watching for you. They knew you were coming. They knew you weren't. They knew you were somebody that you weren't supposed
whistling, passing the message along. Yep.
to. One of the guys that worked with us was he was on the original show, The Bounty Hunters. It was in the 90s. It was an okay show too.
The dog.
They called him Thor. He was a really big dude. They called him Thor, George Formo. And he had told me one time, he said, I was pulling that building one day, and he said they started shooting my hood as I pulled in. And I go, what'd you do? He goes, I turned around, I pulled back out. But we went in there at night, and we would go down in the basement and walk. Well, they took me to do it. I did it once. Walk through the basement, and there's people in there, like homeless people and stuff, and they would check to see if it was any of their bail skips were in there, and they would come up with people occasionally.
Just round and see who. Yeah,
it was a revolving door. These people that were getting arrested and getting bonded out, it was a revolving door.
And going back, right, and going to the same places. It's really funny. You just reminded me of something. So, all the 2 a.m., 3 a.m. calls to go out to the shooting in the middle of East New York or some other spot, or all the, housing project canvases, all of those things, never had a gun pulled on me.
No.
First time I had a gun pulled on me is in suburban Northern Virginia, working as a mental health coach, where one guy who gets forced to go pulls a gun on me. I'm like, all that reporting, not one bullet.
Yeah. I tell you what, we went to a house one time. We go to this house in outside of Newark, and knock on the door. A young girl answers or the mother answers the door, and we said, you need to talk to your daughter. She had stolen a car. Really nice home, really nice people, not a bad neighborhood or anything like that. And she's like, I took care of this. I took care of this. No, you didn't. We always check first so the warrant's still active and everything, So we said, we got to take it. So we took her to the jail in Newark. And when we got there, we didn't really know what door to go in or anything like that. So we got to this building, and it was, I'm just going to guess this, it was like 15 stories high or something. And there was a door out back that said bail. So we're like, oh. So we parked, and we went in there, and they said, no, this is where you post bail. You got to take her around to the front of the building and go up to the 13th floor. Now, again, it's like midnight or something, you know what I mean? So we go back out, and there's people all over on the streets, and there's a bus coming down the street, and we figured out what it was. So they opened gates, the back of the building, big steel gates, and the bus pulled in there. But as it was pulling in there, people on the street were launching beer bottles and stuff and smashing them on the bus, on the windows, on the windshield and stuff. And it looked like something out of Escape from New York to me. I was like, what the hell is going on, right? What it was the bus. They were doing a warrant sweep. So the bus would drive around. The patrol units would call and say, we come to the street. They'd go, and they put the guy in the bus. So the units didn't have to keep coming back. They could stay.
So instead of like a small paddy wagon, they brought a bus.
Yeah, they bought a bus. So the cops could keep going to doors, and what it was they just go around and knock on doors, and whoever was home would pick them up, So, but it freaked me out. So we walk around to the front, and of course, there's like you see on like Law and Order, where there's the stone steps go way up to the courthouse, So we're walking her up the steps to go to the building, and there's inmates out there. Now it's the middle of the night, and they're out there in their orange jumpsuits and stuff, and they're like sweeping and stuff. But I don't see any guards around. It's just inmates.
Trustees? That's strange.
So we get in there, and we take the elevator up, and we get to the 13th floor, and we go in, and it's all like a big cage in that room. And the guy comes out and takes her in the back and switches cuffs, and we're doing the paperwork. And I said, what's the deal with the inmates? There's nobody out there watching me. He goes, if they run off, we'll go get them. And I'm like, this is like an eye opener for me as a kid, as a young guy. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, they'll know they're being more trouble. They don't usually run off,
Did you ever have moments, and I can imagine this, where you had to pick somebody up and you were like, oh, geez, like cops tell me about this sometimes. Geez, I wish I really didn't have to jack this person. Like, I really wish.
Yeah. So we're in upstate New York. We had a situation where the guy I worked for in New Jersey called me, and he said, you got to pick a guy up for me tonight out by Syracuse. I said, okay. He's going to be in this hotel at such and such a time. He's meeting his baby's mother to kiss. He wants to spend a little time with the baby. He's going to kiss her goodbye, and he's going into Canada. And he's not coming back. You can't bounty hunt. You can't get into Canada to do that. Of course, the kid probably never would have gotten in Canada anyway. But this is pre 9/11, obviously.
Well, that's good to know for me for if future trouble.
Yeah. So they want him back. So before he gets into Canada, if it happens to, so they know where he's going to be. And that was a situation of where the woman that he had the baby with, the girl he had the baby with, was like, you can't run off. My family put collateral up for you, So he said, you knock on the door, she'll open the door for you. So we get to this hotel and we contacted a cop and said, they won't help you because it's a civil matter. Unless the person's in NCIC. If they're in NCIC, then they're obligated. But anyway, I said to him, just can you just wait in the parking lot in case?
And that's the FBI database.
It's a database where all the warrants are and stuff. Yeah. But I said, will you just wait in the parking lot for a few minutes while we do this in case we have an issue? You don't have to do anything. We just don't want any violence. We don't want anybody getting hurt. He's like, no, that's fine. So I went over and knocked on the door. She opened the door, pointed a gun at him. He's fine. He comes with us. But your point about, do you wish you never had to pick somebody up? He he kissed his baby. We cuffed him up and he kisses his baby. We put him in the car and he was a young guy and he just started crying. And I said, what's going on? What'd you do? I didn't even know what he did. He stole a motorcycle and he ran from the police and just stupid shit, and I'm like, it's not even worth running from. You're gonna go live in Canada over that.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to jail. I'm just scared to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail. I said, well, do it and get it over with and move on.
Yeah. Probably leaving your kids probably more scary in that moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, Greg, listen, it's been awesome. Want to give you a chance to just wrap up with any closing thoughts you had. I love the conversation about all your different, careers, and certainly about Brianna and Mora's cases. And I'm a big fan of the book. It's definitely a different approach to true crime. It's more like an investigator's report. I personally love the articles from your friend, the articles that you dropped in from your friend. I really did enjoy the book, and it's rare that I really like a true crime book, because I'm like, they have to be well reported for me. They have to make sense. But I wanted to just throw it out there for you for any sort of closing thoughts you had for anybody.
I got to think about that. Can I see those other questions? Did you pop them up? They disappeared. I saw them. Okay.
I didn't put one up, but if somebody has a question, you can drop one in. Any other questions, guys?
I thought I saw something popping up when I was talking. Okay. I don't know. I wanted to get Brianna's word out. Maura Murray's case is a lot more popularized than Brianna's. Brianna's is an absolute mystery also. It happened right there. My opinions has changed over the years, but my opinion right at this moment, based on what I know, is that the two I believe they're related. I believe, and I think that's part of the book that always grabs people at the end.
But yeah, I kind of wish that it didn't take Brianna's case to be related to Mora's for people to care about it, because I think it says something bad about, to me, how we write people off based on certain kinds of perceptions. Even if she was involved in things, why are we writing her off? And why does it need to be connected to Mora for her life as a human being who brought value to the world to be important?
Yeah. It's
well, you guys are doing God's work, so keep it up.
I hope people will read the book. I think you'll enjoy it. I haven't gotten one bad review yet. In fact,
I think you've got a couple new readers in the chat.
Kristen, you can you guys are more than welcome to contact me on Facebook, and I will sign your copy for you.
And I'll put your Facebook contact, your page up on our Patreon, and definitely
And if
and
you
maybe it'll make our book club.
Yay.
Yeah.
Gotten great reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Greg, thank you again. Please say hi to Bruce for me. Give him my
I will.
love tomorrow.
Thank you for
the
having me.
anniversary. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming. And
Oh, by the way,
yeah.
Tomorrow at 1 p.m., the Vermont State Police and the FBI, I think, are making an announcement about Brianna.
Yep.
Keep an eye on the WCAX News will have it on their website, I'm sure.
So WCSX, WCSX, WCAX. Okay, so tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern time, there'll be an announcement about Brianna's case. Hey, right. You guys have it here first, or first-ish.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. We'll
Talk
see
soon.
you guys. I'm gonna put us in another room real quick and end the stream. For those of you guys who are going to the prosecutors, I will see you in about 33 minutes. So talk to you soon.